Hi, welcome to Formula Citizen, episode 13. This is a recap of the United States and Mexico Grand Prix, the double header in North America. I cannot believe we're 20 races down in the 2025 Formula One season. We have 4 races to go. This is the business end of the season. And you might recall in episode 12, we talked about Oscar's controversial lap 1 incident in Singapore with his teammate, which had repercussions. There was a general acceptance, I guess, amongst the Formula One fan base that the gloves were off after the Singapore incident. We're all looking forward to the races in North America. McLaren had wrapped up the Constructors' team title, and all eyes were on Oscar and Lando. The problem is this. If you want wheel-to-wheel combat, it requires both drivers to qualify and race on the same section of track. And the truth is that Oscar has been nowhere for the past 2 races. P5 in Texas and P5 in Mexico City, and that is not the form of a Formula One world champion. Is it too early to call this a form slump? Has the pressure of being championship leader since April taken its psychological toll? Is this McLaren's doing in some way, or is it just track specific? In episode 13, we examine the facts and most importantly, break down all the myths. Here's my disclaimer. I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but I do believe that McLaren would prefer for Lando to be the 2025 Formula One world champion. He's the senior driver in the team. He spent 8 years at McLaren. He and his father, Adam Norris, have a personal relationship with Zak Brown, and the team would significantly benefit commercially from having a British Formula One champion in their team. But the suggestion that the team would somehow sabotage Oscar's car performance to ensure Lando wins is a gross overreaction. Those rumours are false and they need to end. Let's talk about car setup. Some drivers, I guess, would reach for an excuse over the past couple of weekends, blaming the setup or an extreme situation, looking for reasons to say the car is broken, to replace the floor, the chassis, the monocoque. That's not Oscar's style, and he's been clear in his media statements that the car feels fine. He's quoted as saying in Mexico City, in qualifying, I feel like I did a reasonable job, and the car felt reasonable as well. So the lack of lap time is a bit of a mystery. Unless he's being fed media talking points, and I don't believe that's the case, we can assume the car performance is just not translating to lap time, or hasn't in the last 2 races. Andreas Stella, the team principal at McLaren's, confirmed this point. Every evidence, every piece of data, every indirect measurement of information we have tells us that there is no problem with the car, and we have no reason to suspect that that's the case. I would change other components other than the chassis, like the floor, the front wing, but in reality, there's a rotation of parts. So it's not like there's always the same parts on the cars. So we have reasons to be reassured that there's no problem with Oscar's car. I thought that was a really important quote, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. We know Oscar has a car under him at the moment that's capable of winning races. We saw that in Mexico when Lando won by 30 plus seconds. And this leads us to examine if this form is actually track specific or it's related to his driver technique. So I've called this section the track and driver combination. I think many fans have also forgotten, just in talking about this point, that Oscar's in a much steeper learning curve than Lando. Lando's bank of knowledge is 8 years. He spent 8 seasons in Formula One, and Oscar's only in his 3rd year. So we should remember that and keep that in context. The last 2 races have been on low grip tracks. Lando excels on tracks with predominantly slow and medium speed corners. We've seen that throughout the season and throughout his career. Oscar excels on tracks with a higher cornering speed, which require braking performance. That's where his edge is. So historically, Piastri has been poor at both COTA and Mexico City. So let's break this down and look at the 2 tracks. The qualifying differential at the Circuit of the Americas over the past 3 years has been 0.486 seconds. Piastri has been 0.486 seconds slower than his teammate, equivalent to around 6 grid places. And in the race, Piastri's been 3.6 places behind him. He's been outscored by Lando Norris 59-20 in points on this track for the last 3 years. At Mexico City, we can't look at the qualifying differential. You might recall that Norris and Piastri have both failed to get out of Q1 in Mexico without a representative lap time once apiece over the last 2 years. And this means there's no good historical qualifying data to benchmark their performance on this track. But we should highlight that the 2025 qualifying gap of 0.588 seconds was the largest of the season. So that's significant. The race differential in Mexico City across the last 3 years, Piastri has scored just 18 points against Norris's 53 points. Based on this data, these performances should have been expected. Andreas Stella was adamant that the low grip nature of the 2 tracks was the dominant factor in Piastri's underperformance. He's quoted as saying after the race, I think in Austin and here in Mexico, the conditions are such that the car slides a lot. And I think this requires a familiarity with the car, with how you exploit the car, which is possibly something Oscar needs to still work a little bit on. It seems as though it took until Saturday night for Oscar to come to terms with the shortcoming, right? He adjusted his approach on Sunday in the race. He looked a lot more competitive, accepting that the potential of the car was restricted by his position in the pack and the challenges of overtaking in Mexico. But nonetheless, I guess Oscar confirmed this in his post-race media comments when he said, it's kind of become obvious after qualifying that there were a few things I needed to change pretty majorly in how I was driving. And today was about first trying to limit the damage, but trying to learn some things about that as well. I think I've just had to drive very differently the last couple of weekends, or I've not driven differently when I should have. I think that's been strange for me to get my head around because I've been driving exactly the same as I have all year. It's just that these last couple of weekends, the car or the tires or something have required quite a different way of driving, and I've just not really got on top of that. So I thought that was a really interesting analysis. They're very clear. Driver technique and I guess track specificity are contributing factors to his performance in the last two races. Andrea Stella said Piastri's progress on Sunday was strong. He's quoted as saying, I'm pleased with him adopting some of the adjustment that we wanted to adopt today based on what we learned in terms of driving our car fast in these special conditions that you have in Mexico. We've added tools to the toolbox with Oscar, which will make him definitely even stronger for an exciting final part of the championship. Of the next four races, this is interesting. Only one of those, Las Vegas, takes place on a low grip surface. So that all bodes well for Oscar in terms of the final four races of the season. I want to talk about pressure and psychology. Based on the data, there's no doubt Norris is in the ascendancy. He's on the up. But at the same time, he's been the hunter, having been as much as 34 points behind in the championship since the summer break. So that changes your mindset, and we've talked a lot about that in previous episodes. Before the break, Piastri was on average 0.052 seconds faster in qualifying, but since the summer break, he's been 0.16 seconds adrift. He's been slower. He out-qualified Norris in the first part of the season, 8-6 before the break, but he's been out-qualified 4-2 following the break. So there's been a trend, I guess, towards Lando Norris since the summer break. Having been tied 7-7 in head-to-head race finishes before the break, Norris has beaten Piastri in every race that they've both finished. So I think that's significant as well. 10-10 in qualifying at the moment, 10-8 in races. And this analysis just validates the 1 point gap between the two drivers. There is nothing between them. But the stats tell only one part of the story since the summer break. And here's a really interesting breakdown. Piastri was the fastest driver at the Dutch Grand Prix, and he had Norris beaten before his DNF. In Italy, they were closely matched, enough that Piastri was able to capitalise on the slow pit stop before team orders obviously reversed those places. But he was quick in Italy. In Singapore, which has traditionally been a Lando Norris track in 2023 and 2024, Piastri out-qualified him for the first time, and he was regularly faster across the whole race weekend. He was only beaten in the race by that first lap incident, which McLaren retrospectively decided shouldn't have been allowed based on their internal racing rules. So again, those three races after the summer break could have been very, very different outcomes for Oscar. And in terms of form, certainly demonstrate that he is driving at his very best. Even in Baku, he thought personally that he had strong pace despite the crashes. It's fair to say the pressure's not getting to him. So then we go on and start looking at car development. McLaren has had the development tap switched off for months now. It hasn't brought a major upgrade to the car since the Italian Grand Prix, and even at that time, most of those new parts were specific to the Monza circuit. The car's last substantive upgrade was the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, where it received a reworked floor, the most important aerodynamic part in the car. Piastri was by far the fastest driver at the British Grand Prix and seemed sure to win that race before the safety car infringement dropped him to P2 behind Lando Norris. The new front suspension brought to the Canadian Grand Prix has been pointed out as a potential smoking gun because only Norris took that part. It was offered to Piastri, but he turned it down. He felt that the negatives outweighed the positives. The suspension tweak wasn't an upgrade. It was designed to generate more front-end feeling. So Oscar Piastri appears to be much less bothered by this than Lando Norris was. He's won 2 races since Canada when Lando received that new front suspension development. And would have won at least another 2 races, but for circumstances we've just spoken to. So we can safely discount this point as being a fundamental problem. There is no issues around the development of the car in a direction that suits Lando Norris. Let's address the rumours that Oscar Piastri suffered both a DRS malfunction and an underpowered PU in qualifying in Mexico that left him several tenths down on Lando Norris along the straights. That did show up in the telemetry, but both were rectified well before Q3. The FIA data traces show that both drivers clocked almost identical top speeds in Mexico. Norris achieved 349.8 kilometers an hour in the speed trap, and Oscar clocked 349.1 kilometers an hour. The telemetry shows both cars were evenly matched. for their top speed on their fastest laps at the end of all 3 DRS straights. On those laps, Piastri lost a combined 0.036 of a second down the first 2 straights, which is easily explained by him getting worse exits from the preceding corners due to the car sliding. Let's summarize. We're effectively in a micro championship now. We have 4 races and 1 point separating the 2 leaders. But Lando, for the first time, is the hunted. How will he cope with this pressure? No matter how mentally strong you are, it's impossible not to lie in bed at night and start dreaming about being a Formula One world champion. The question I have is, how much work has he done this year on his psychology? Focusing on the process, staying in the moment, positive self-talk, all the factors that define high performance. Oscar, on the other hand, is now the hunter. If he can overcome the fact he held a 34-point lead in the championship in September, just a few races ago, and accept that he may finish runner-up to his senior teammate in 2025, then maybe, just maybe, he can relax and be more aggressive in the final 4 races of the year. We know he can put together a championship-winning season. He's done it before at F2 and in F3. How will he respond to the situation? I recall the story of Andy Murray, who for many years carried the weight of a nation on his back, the pressure as a British tennis player to win Wimbledon, the Holy Grail. After he made the ultimate breakthrough in 2013, he acknowledged that he'd been asked by a psychologist many years earlier to imagine playing out his whole career, retiring with some success, but having never won Wimbledon. Once you're at peace with that scenario, you are released from the anchor, that mental block. And that's what they're both facing right now, that this could be a once-in-a-career opportunity to win a world title. Lando was booed in Mexico. He is well aware of the general view amongst Formula One fans at the moment. He's not immune to the noise around the fact that many people believe the team are favouring him. How does this impact his performance moving forward? If Lando is crowned 2025 world champion, could he be one of the sport's most unpopular world champions? Really interested in your views on that one. Here's my brutal assessment. Oscar Piastri lost momentum in Monza. The moment he pulled over and let Lando pass, he gave away power to the team. He gave away power to McLaren. Call it karma or tempting the racing gods. In that moment, I believe his mindset shifted. He accepted the role of number 2 driver. If Max or Lewis or Sebastian were in that position, we all know what they would have done. The answer is clear. They would have been ruthless. And that's what it takes to be a Formula One world champion. Max, let's talk about Max. 5 races ago, he was 104 points behind the championship leader. He's now 36 points behind. He's closed the gap by 68 points. It's eye-watering. He dominated in Texas. He won both the sprint and the race. He was obviously helped in the sprint race with the incident between the 2 McLaren cars and the fact they didn't score any points. Could be, if Max wins the 2025 title, the most pivotal moment in the championship. Is he a serious threat? Yes, of course he is. How could you rule him out? I'm going to save that discussion for episode 14, the next podcast after the Brazilian Grand Prix, if you can get the business done. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Enjoy the Brazilian Grand Prix. It's always one of my favorite races of the year. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye.